Yeah, so hey guys, so one Kevin, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to say that. And so you guys, you're gonna see for this presentation, I want to keep it a little light, a little bit different from what you guys might normally see. So this one, this presentation is gonna be talking about really just how quantum relates to our humanity side, to our humanities literally as a field, so poetry, stuff like that, but as well as just like how it affects us on a philosophical basis. So I want to give a little different perspective as someone that's not just a quantum computing person, but also a quantum engineer. So part one, beauty. So I just made my presentation based on what do I love about quantum. And so again, like I said, my background is in humanities and in quantum. So I have a really cool perspective. So I literally was taking classes on film and Quentin Tarantino and then going to classes about quantum field theory. So I got to really appreciate what I found in common between those two fields, even though they seem so disparate, so different. And what they have in common to me, what I like about them is their ambiguity. Their ambiguity. So a lot of you guys already know, I don't know the extent of everyone's quantum background, of course, but the big thing about quantum that's really, really cool is that it changed how we looked at the universe from Newtonian times. Even before that, of course, you're talking about Aristotle and stuff like that, where it's very deterministic. You drop a ball, it falls to the ground, to now, well, 99.9% of the time, it's going to fall to it's going to stay, it's going to fall to the ground. But that, there's the idea in quantum of that 0.0001% chance that it's going to phase through the wall. You guys have probably heard that before when talking about quantum. Obviously, for macroscopic things, it's not exactly, it gets a little more complicated. But again, that idea, as we all know, of probability as philosophy, as events being more probability based as opposed to deterministic, meaning that deterministic, for those who don't know, just means that if you put in A, you get B. If you put in X, you get Y all the time. 101%, never any other variables. They're going to change your answer. So that's what that means by deterministic, for those who don't know. Humanities and science. So you guys probably didn't expect to see this on a quantum presentation. On the left is one of my favorite poets, John Keats. He's considered a romantic poet. And for those who don't know, yes, there's romantic like Friday night with your significant other and some wine, but there's also romantic in the sort of literary context, meaning an appreciation of nature, which comes in the latter 1700s of Western Europe, especially in Britain. And so one thing, again, I was saying about my background, literature and quantum, is I got to appreciate the ambiguity of expression, of specifically description. So again, you're 1905, you're a physicist, and you're trying to figure out how to explain electrons, and you have to use a probability function with Heisenberg, et cetera, the Schrodinger equation, et cetera. And it's the same thing in poetry. Anyone that's ever done a poetry class, if you've ever sat around and talked about it, it's a lot of different interpretations. And so this poem specifically, Ode on a Nightingale, is a really famous poem by John Keats. And I don't worry, we're not gonna read out the whole thing. It's not gonna become a poetry class, but I just wanted to highlight that last line there. So the poem, for those who aren't familiar with it, is about John Keats, who's basically just enjoying his day, hanging out in the trees. And there's a bird, it's a beautiful bird, it's a nightingale, singing a song, and it basically takes him out of his element. It adds this melody that just seduces him on a psychological level. So I'll read just the first two lines and the last two lines. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. And the last two sentences, the last two phrases is, was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music, do I wake or sleep? And so what you're seeing with quantum, what I like about quantum, is that it has that parallel with humanities, with literature, with description, with words. It's really words, really, is, hey, how do you describe this experience you had? And it's okay, well, you described it a certain way, say vision or dream, I might interpret those words differently than you. There's an ambiguity in the interpretation. In the quantum sense, there's an ambiguity in terms of the position, which we all know. And there we go. With regards to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, I know you guys probably already know this, but just so we're all on the same page, is it describes the limitations of observing a quantum particle. It describes the limitations of observing, which is really interesting, right? Because normally when you're trying to describe something, but pre-quantum, it's very specific. You know, if you're getting back to Newton, it's you drop a ball and I can tell you the height, the kinetic energy, the position, everything about that ball, more or less. Then you get to quantum and it goes, well, actually there's a sort of wall you run into where, hey, I can tell you a little bit about its position, but I can't tell you much about its speed. Or I can tell you a lot about its speed, but I can't tell you a lot about its position. So that's what you're seeing here on the right, of course, that delta X and delta P, for those who aren't super mathy, the X stands for the position, the uncertainty in the position, to be clear, the uncertainty in position, think delta, gamma, movement, change. So uncertainty in the position, and then uncertainty in the speed, And so in short, the product, the collective uncertainty of the position and the speed of a particle and on a subatomic quantum level is within a certain bound. So you say, hey, I want to know where this particle is. Well, now I can't tell you much about how fast it's going. I say how fast it's going, I can't really tell you much about where it is. So, and it just puzzled people. Of course. I mean, it puzzled anybody. You know, anytime there's something uncertain, we're like, oh, I don't understand. How do we, you know, even when the weather is uncertain, we get a little frustrated. So imagine when it's the laws of physics. That'd be very frustrating. So here, I'm not going to read the quote or the whole quote, but this is a quote by Heisenberg. Again, the founder of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And so I'm going to summarize a little bit in the context. So let's go back. So early 1900s, they said, physics is done. We're good to go. We just have a few loose ends. You guys have probably heard that before. But then they have this huge explosion of knowledge, right? With black body radiation saying, whoa, we got a huge problem actually, where the basis of our physics has been undermined. In other words, you thought that imagine you thought you cleaned your room, you thought it was almost done, you're ready to head out, and then there's a tornado that comes in and then you got to clean up the room again. That's basically what happened. So Heisenberg and Einstein at that time, I mean, the physicists, it was like, 20, 30, 50 people all over Europe. So you would kind of just write your little letter, you meet up for a little conference. It wasn't now, of course, where it's, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of physicists across the world. It was pretty straightforward. And so you all were friends too, which is the interesting part. And so if you read here, I actually highlighted in orange the parts that stand out here. There we go, put them right back on. So one is that he starts talking to Einstein and he says that it is the theory which decides what we can observe. It is the theory which decides what we can observe. So he's walking through the park, nocturnal walk. So we're going to the first orange part here. I decided to go on a walk, an nocturnal walk through, I don't know how to say that word, but flailed park, we'll work through it together, and to think further about the matter. So you're seeing that point again, going back from John Keats, of nature, right? They're trying to go on walks, trying to understand, and they're in that understanding of being in nature, they get more elucidation, more clarity about how nature actually works. So they're talking about the electron, and they say, but perhaps, so again, that emphasis on uncertainty, ambiguity, what we really observe was something much less. Perhaps, again, the last one, the last orange one, perhaps we merely saw a series of discrete and ill-defined spots through which the electron had passed. Fast forward to now that black part approximately, can quantum mechanics represent the fact an electron finds itself approximately in a given place and that it moves approximately with a given velocity? And can we make those approximations so close that they do not cause experimental difficulties? So what you're seeing here is 100, right now, we're talking about how to use quantum computing for applications. Physicists were thinking the same thing. Hey, listen, okay, this is strange, but I need to know how to use these principles to get my experiment right. So it's that same question of functionality and productivity that we're applying now on an industrial, academic, even governmental level that the physicists, the academics were applying, again, 100 years ago. So you're seeing that same theme of, okay, there's theory and there's application. And how do I understand enough of the theory where my application, the result I want, happens? So you're seeing that same theme. Now, over here, we're gonna haiku. I really love this haiku, by the way. And you're seeing the role of observation and self-reflection. So this is all under the house of the beauty of quantum mechanics and how it relates to our humanities. Again, I'll go back really quick. So you see here is ambiguity in terms of description and experience. What was my experience? What actually was going on? Same thing here, ambiguity, description. Okay, where is the electron? I don't really understand. How do we use our words to describe that experience? How do we use our words to describe that experience? Now here with observation and self-reflection, you're seeing how the observation of a thing literally reflects back at you, So let's go back again. So here you're hearing the bird, and now the melody of the bird is changing your own experience. So you're in one state, you hear the bird, now you're in another state. You're, whoa, what just happened? I'm confused. Here you're going on a walk, talking about Einstein's advice to you, and now you're thinking about where was the electron? So now 3, again, it just emphasizes that further point. Now this is in the interpretation. So a lot of us may know John von Neumann, super, really famous academic. He's one of my favorites in terms of just his contribution and just his intelligence. So brilliant guy. He's one of those people that had his hand in a little bit of everything. Our computers, for those who don't know, that's probably one of the biggest contributions. Our computers use what's called John von Neumann architecture. So him, Claude Shannon, and Alan Turing are basically, in my opinion, some of the fathers of modern computing. And so I bring him up because there's a quote here, I got to have my quote, talking about words and descriptions, is that the rule of quantum mechanics are correct, but there is only one system which may be treated with quantum mechanics, namely the entire material world. There exists external observers which cannot be treated within quantum mechanics, namely human and perhaps animal minds, which perform measurements on the brain, causing wave function collapse. I know that was a lot. Okay, what the heck did he just say? So for John von Neumann, what he's saying is so again, you're trying to make sense of everything. So you've got the application of the theory, you've got the theory itself, and you've got the understanding of the theory, right? There's 3 different aspects to it. Me, again, as a quantum engineer, I'm a little bit more focused on the application. For him, John von Neumann, he was interested in the interpretation, the understanding of it. What he was trying to theorize, a lot of us may know what's called the Copenhagen interpretation. And some of us may know the multiverse interpretation. Anyone who likes sci-fi, you go left in this universe, the you in the other universe goes right. What he's saying, John von Neumann is saying is, well, what if it's your consciousness that is affecting the result? So they understood the measurement effects. Let me pause there. They understood the measurement effect. They knew, you're using your photons to observe that electron. The act of measurement changes the result. They knew that already, but he's trying to understand and internalize it for himself. And he's saying maybe it's our brains, right, that's creating that idea of left and right. And so it's really, really interesting. It's the basis behind it hasn't really gotten to a lot of sci-fi movies. They didn't like the idea so much, and I'll explain why in a second. But it goes along with this idea of description and understanding, and how your brain, your consciousness as a human can affect the results of a physical experiment. So that's why they didn't like it. But looking at the poem on the right, very beautiful, a lot shorter than the quote. Watching the moon at midnight, I knew myself completely, no part left out. So again, you're seeing this theme from John Keats to Izumi to John von Neumann of nature kind of being this mirror of self-reflection, where the human looks into nature and nature kind of looks back into him and changes man, the observer, the human brain, from where it was before. So that's just something I find really interesting about quantum. I love just how it sort of reflects back at you. Specifically, again, is with Einstein. We know that Einstein was so frustrated. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. He had a famous quote, a lot of famous quotes, but one of them was, I'm pretty sure the moon is there when I don't look at it. So he was very frustrated by quantum. And so, but it was interesting because his thoughts and his theories, of course, contributed to quantum. I mean, basically made quantum a thing, even with some of his 1905 papers. And so going from a world that's deterministic with Newton to now probabilistic with Einstein in that world really has some major ramifications on how we understand the universe. It's like, well, things like free will. Did you make the choices you made, or did something influence you to make those choices? Are really powerful philosophical questions behind not just the things we're creating, right, but the things that are influencing us, and thereby things we're creating. Meaning, as a technologist, our role is to understand not only what we're creating, but why are we creating it? What is it inside of us that's the impetus, that's the philosophy that is making us create this thing? Part two, the imagination part. So now we're going to talk about, I said this very briefly before we saw the presentation about quantum dots and Nano Splash. And so now we're going to talk a little bit more about quantum engineering and how it's different from quantum computing. You guys have probably seen a few different presentations around this. I just want to give my 2 cents on it. And so one, imagination. My background, like I told you, I've studied under Seth Lloyd and a bunch of other people in quantum, and I was at MIT and everything. And it was very much so focused into quantum computing. You guys have seen a lot of applications on that, quantum neural networks, quantum annealing, et cetera. And so, like I said, my job is to expand that, to stretch the imagination, say, what else quantum can we do in the world? What can I throw the quantum sticker on and do something a little different with, besides just computers? Computers are great, but like, what else is there? So here with quantum computing, I imagine everyone here probably knows Shor's algorithm or heard of it, Shor's algorithm. So to summarize Shor's algorithm, it's really great for cracking encryption. Really, really great for that. And it has a huge sort of existential threat on our state of the internet, state of privacy, everything. And so for me, I'm listening to lectures about this from Peter Shor. I remember he came to our class. I'm like, okay, well, besides NSA stuff, what else can we do besides that? Besides, cracking Facebook passwords and seeing what your ex is up to, what else could we do? So Oompa Loompas, probably did not expect that, right? So the reason I put Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, classic movie for those who don't know, is because one, it's orange, so it matches the theme of my presentation, so I had to put it in. But more importantly, number two, is that, I don't know if anyone remembers that movie, but it had so much imagination to it. It was so out there and bold and weird, and you're like, what is this? And just, you saw the kid that fell in the chocolate, didn't come back, so it was just this really great experience. And it's something that really inspired me as a kid, just to think outside the box. And in the context of Conduit is, okay, well, what can we do again that's a little different from the norm? And that is Nano Splash. So Nano Splash is a COVID-19 test that we're designing currently with my CTO, Logan Thrasher Collins. Shout out to him, amazing scientist. And we're using it to make a bottle. We're using quantum technology to make a bottle that you spit into it, boom, as it says in there, use the directions, spit into it, and the chemical inside, right here, if you look at spit here, there's a chemical in there that changes colors to tell you if you have COVID-19 or not. Game changer. Now, why am I bringing this up in a quantum presentation is because it uses, over here, quantum dots. Now, I didn't put too much about quantum dots here, just because, it's like a lot of IP type stuff, so I can't go into super detail. But in short, is Nano Splash works in 2 major steps. One is you spit into it, and the first part here of the bottle, that first segment, step 1, is it separates your saliva from COVID-19. So Kevin just had a huge cheeseburger, wants to use Nano Splash. We filter out the cheeseburger. We got to get rid of the cheeseburger. So that's step number 1. And then step number 2 is then we use quantum dots in the bottom part here. I'll go back to the first picture. And that cap is really, really important. Inside there, we're using a combination of DNA and enzymes and quantum dots to basically create a reaction saying, hey, we've got some SARS-CoV-2, whether it be, the Delta variant, the Omicron variant, the Megatron variant, you know, whatever Transformer variant, whatever it is that's coming out next week on the news, we can detect it and then adapt to it. So it's really, really cool. And that's what I'm saying as an application away from just quantum computing and more towards something that's a consumer good. Technically, it's a medical device, obviously, but in the context of our target audience, it's really for consumers and something a little away from like cyber games and hackers from like the 1980s. I don't know if you guys remember those movies with Angelina Jolie. But and so quantum on the inside. So now this part, it's not just, don't worry guys, I didn't just have one quantum twist for you guys. That'd be a little too, I know it's, the testing part is awesome, but I want to add a little more quantum to it. Is we're not just using quantum for our testing, for our bottle you spit into, but also for the manufacturing. So anyone who knows about, you know, your business or inventing is that it's not just about the thing you're making, right? But how the heck are you gonna get it to your customer, your user? And so we're able to, what you're seeing here on this picture on the right is really, really cool. It's the schematic, it's not schematic, but it's the picture for our factory. We call it the Nano Factory. And so we're able to automate a lot of things. Now that's just straightforward automation, nothing crazy quantum there. But in terms of the anticipating product defects, so we're able to use the sort of the noise of the quantum computer and say, hey, what are some, you know, funky prototypes we're going to get out of our factory that we want to anticipate in advance? Really, really awesome stuff. So you're seeing quantum not just on the consumer level here, but also quantum sort of behind the scenes in the supply chain aspect. So as a part of that larger picture of factory automation. So important. And if you see the orange here, you know why I had to put in Oompa because of course they're orange. And finally, to close off my presentation is I had to put Bruce Lee in there just because I love Bruce Lee. And what he talks about is, in this quote you see right here, is all types of knowledge are ultimately mean self-knowledge, So when Einstein's super frustrated, let's go back here to the talk he has with Heisenberg about quantum, it's not what frustrated him, right? It wasn't really that the theories were different, it's that his perception of the universe had dramatically changed overnight. You go from a world, you know, think about for all of us in the last few years with the pandemic, is the world's felt so much more uncertain. You know, you don't know what the heck's gonna happen. Is the toilet paper gonna be gone when you go to the store? Oh, do I gotta stay in school, or is the job going to work or not? You know, all those types of questions that can be really frustrating, especially if you have a family and especially if you have kids, because the schools are crazy. But the point is that what frustrated Einstein and what challenges to this day is the understanding that the universe isn't exactly how we think it is, right? It's not deterministic, at least as far as we can tell, right? As far as we can observe and poke inside our human experience, it's probabilistic, meaning I can give you all the variables, all the numbers, but sometimes you might win, sometimes you might lose. You know, so that's very, very frustrating for a species where we crave that certainty and that stability. And I think that's what quantum challenges us on, is say, well, I'm going to take that away from you. And I'm going to say, okay, well, in reality, you impose that idea of determinism, you impose the idea of stability upon the universe, but in fact, the universe is much more probabilistic, which is very, very scary. But at the same time, it leads to thereby much more opportunities and thereby interpretations and many universes, multiple multiverses that you can traverse and take it to a world that might be so much more different and richer and beautiful than you ever imagined. And so with that, you know, I have to end on an awesome picture. I just said Bruce Lee, so boom, Bruce Lee, gotta give credit. And so I'll end off with saying this, is again, as a quantum engineer, someone who's, I've seen entrepreneurship side, I've been in the academic side, you know, and I'm from, by the way, I'm from Florida, and I went to school in Boston, so very different, extremely different environments. And so I've seen a lot of different things, whether it be, again, from business aspects to academics to geographic. And one thing I think that quantum has given me is it forces you to think, which is very frustrating. I know Kevin could attest to this in terms of learning about the new formulas and the new technology, is it forces us to think about what the future can be, which can be frustrating, but also really, really exciting. And that's the reason I love quantum.
Awesome. So you had me at Peter Shore in the classroom.
Right.
So a lot of us in quantum, we've just gotten into it this past year or two. It's kind of new to us. I guess the Salvador Ivanegas, he was in it since 2004. And that's besides like you said, Peter Shore or John Martinis or any of these other people. And I think who's the other one? John Barnes was maybe 2014, 2016. And what I want to know is like, because a lot of us are either getting into it or want to get into it, is how can we learn from the mistakes of the past of not like of doing the right thing, of implementing quantum for applications?